Hello, today we are going to talk about the 18-day method for making compost, otherwise known as the Berkeley method. Now with this method, what you will need for tools is you will need simply just a long-handled pitchfork. Usually 4 tines is kind of good. It's easy to lift with, maybe 3 tines. If you have too many tines, then it tends to be quite heavy and hard to turn the material. You're going to need a rake potentially just to be able to clean up your mess after you're done. And you're going to need a tarp. And you're likely going to need some source of water. And of course the materials that you're going to be composting. In order for this compost method to work within the 18 days, there are a couple keys to success that we're going to be looking at here. First of which is your pile must be greater than or equal to 1 meter cubed in total. Any less and it's just the pile's not going to get hot enough and it won't break down fast enough to do this in 18 days. Now just to give you an idea of what that means, if you were to make a free fall pile that basically will just fall in a cone shape, this pile would be about 5.5 feet tall at its peak. That will give you about 1 meter cubed in total. Second of all, we want to make sure that we're turning it frequently, which will be our next topic, is exactly how do we do all this. Number 3, we want to make sure that the pile stays nice and moist so that the breakdown can happen fast enough. And number 4, the mixture and the ingredients are just simply 1/3 of a meter cubed of manure, 1/3 of a meter cubed of something green. So this could be your kitchen scraps, lawn clippings, green leaves. It could be all sorts of different things. And 1/3 of a meter cubed of things that are brown. So here's our carbon source where we're looking at things like sawdust, very fine wood chips, brown leaves, dried grass clippings, straw, and things like that. So we're looking at our 18-day setup. On day 1, the very first step is going to be to pitchfork all of our elements together. So you're going to have some greens, you're going to have some manure, and you're going to have some shredded carbon of some sort. So this might be our sawdust, this might be straw, this might be dried leaves. You want to pitchfork these all together. Then what we want to do is we want to water it very heavily. So we want to saturate this pile and water it with a hose until the pile starts having water running out the bottom. And when you take a handful of the compost and you squeeze it, you could actually wring it out and a couple drops would come out. That's how wet we want this pile. Once we have it that wet, you can simply just take a couple of long sticks and kind of lay them over, kind of like a teepee. And that is just to create a little bit of airflow in between that and our plastic cover. So our plastic cover would simply just be covering this with a tarp of some sort. And once that's covered up, then we can just wait for 3 days. On day 4, we are going to turn the pile. Easiest way to do this is just take the pile and pitchfork it into another pile beside, recover it, make sure it's still moist. On day 6, we're going to turn it again. On day 8, we're going to turn it again, and at this point, we are going to see some pretty decent changes. It's at this stage between day 6 and day 8 that the compost has reached its highest temperature. So we are looking at actually having our pile get up to between 50 and 70 degrees Celsius. So this is going to be really quite warm. If you were to stick your arm in this pile at this temperature, it would actually be warm enough that it would be uncomfortable to hold your arm in there. So if you've done this right and you have a large enough pile, so once again, that pile, if it was just freestanding, would be about 5.5 feet, which is about 1.5 meters, give or take. So if you kind of have that in mind, you know how big your pile has to be, which is actually a lot of material. Then we continue on, and during this stage too, if you notice any additions that you need to make, you can do that as you go along. And then on day 10, 12, and 14, you're just going to be turning the pile over again. By day 16, it's going to start being a really rich dark pile. On day 18, on the very last day, when we go to turn it, if everything has worked properly, then our pile should be dark brown. It should smell really good. If you think about the best smelling soil, that's what this would smell like. And our pile, the key here is that our pile should be the same size as when we started. So next we'll look at some of the issues that you might have along the way and how you can correct those. So day 6 to 8 is when we can typically remedy some of the issues that we may have with our pile, and when we're really going to start to see any issues that will make our composting maybe a little bit longer than the 18 days. So one of the problems that we have is that the pile is not getting hot enough. Now this could be for a number of different reasons. And first of all, go back and make sure that you have the proper ratio of materials in your pile. Make sure that your pile is definitely moist enough. And if those things are in check, then just wait another day or two, maybe turn it one more time and see if the pile will heat up. If you end up with a white mildew on your pile, this white mildew is due to the fact that your pile has likely gone anaerobic, meaning that there's not enough oxygen in your pile. So what you can do is just stir it a little bit more frequently, or you can maybe take the tarp off for a little while, let some airflow kind of at it. You can even take the handle of your pitchfork, stick it into the pile, wiggle it around a little bit to create a little bit of like a funnel in the middle of the pile, just to let some of the airflow go up and over. If your pile is hard to turn, it means that you probably don't have your material shredded quite enough. All that's going to happen is it's going to be harder to turn, and it's going to take maybe longer than the 18 days. But even if we don't get this right and it takes an extra week or two, we're still making compost in less than 30 days, which is still a lot more efficient than pretty much any other method that we currently use. Another issue that you might have is that it's not composting very fast. This could indicate that you might have a little bit too much carbon in your system. If you go online, you'll find a whole bunch of different charts for composting that show the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So if the number is high, like for example, sawdust is around 500 to 1, that indicates that there's a lot of carbon and not very much nitrogen. So sawdust is almost pure carbon. Whereas if we look at something on one of those lists like rabbit manure, now don't quote me on this, but I believe rabbit manure is around 8 to 1 carbon to nitrogen, indicating that it's really quite high in nitrogen in comparison to sawdust. So what we can do is add, by looking at charts, we can add more green things are typically higher in nitrogen. Certain types of manures can be. We can add a couple of those things in at day 6 or day 8, and really all you've done is lost about 6 days. Nothing will go wrong with your compost if you add more of those materials at this point. The most common mistake that most people make is adding too much nitrogen and not enough of the other elements. When this happens, your pile will shrink and it might start to smell a little bit putrid as well. So just keep that in mind, that if your pile is shrinking, chances are you have too much nitrogen, so add a little bit of carbon in. One more thing to add is that if you wanted to make more than just the 1 meter cubed worth of compost at any given time, let's say you have a large farm and a tractor that can turn this and everything, you wouldn't actually make the pile higher. What you would do is still make the pile about the 1.5 meters high and just make a really long column of it, and then turn that pile instead. And that's the easiest, fastest way to make compost. Now, you can even start as simple as just taking some chicken manure and some sawdust, kind of 1/2 meter cubed of each, mixing them together, adding your water, and it will make compost, but it won't be very interesting. So I encourage you to experiment with this quite a bit. Try it when it's a bit cold out, try it when it's warm out, see what kind of results you get. And if you do try this out, I'd like to hear about how it goes. I am really good at adding too much nitrogen and having my pile shrink by pretty much half the volume halfway through. So I'm interested to see kind of how you guys make out with it. And I'm more of a lazy composter. I like to compost in place, just cutting the plants down, leaving them on the soil, letting them turn over on their own. Either that, or in the winter, simply just dumping all of my kitchen waste basically into a pile and hoping that one day it'll turn into compost. But if you'd like to speed things up, this is a good place to start.